The bullet whistled past Caleb Archer's ear, splintering the porch beam behind him. He dove sideways, rifle clutched tight, boots scraping against weathered wood. Behind him, Eliza's breathing came sharp and quick through the broken window. The Delancey gang had finally come calling. 3 months earlier, the drought had gripped Bitter Creek like a fist of bone. The land stretched dry and cracked beneath a merciless Kansas sky. Cattle dropped one by one in the withering heat. Dust clung to every surface, every lung. In Jacob Monroe's sagging farmhouse, desperation sat heavy at the kitchen table. The old man's fingers drummed against worn wood. His wife, Mary, stirred an empty pot. Their daughter, Eliza, barely 18, swept her from floors that would never stay clean. "I spoke with Caleb Archer," Jacob announced. The words fell like stones into still water. Mary's spoon froze mid-stir. Eliza's broom slipped from her hands. "The cattleman?" Eliza asked, though something cold already crept up her spine. "He'll cancel our debt. Give us a pregnant cow. We can rebuild." Eliza's voice came small. "At what price?" Jacob's eyes met hers, steady as winter. "You'll marry him." The room tilted. Eliza stepped back, shaking her head. "He's old enough to be my father. He's 44. You're 18. It's legal and it'll save his family. Please, Father, don't do this." Jacob rose, his voice hard as hammered steel. "A cow will keep your mother fed, keep your brothers from starving. That's the cost, and you'll pay it." Eliza turned to her mother, desperate. "Mama." Mary wouldn't meet her eyes. "We do what we must," she whispered. The wedding took place in Bitter Creek's small white church. No flowers, no music, just creaking pews and watching eyes. Eliza wore her mother's yellow dress, hands trembling in her lap. Her hair had been braided too tight, as if to keep her thoughts from wandering. Caleb Archer stood tall in his black coat, face carved from stone. He spoke little, nodded when required, signed where needed. He didn't smile. The townspeople whispered behind their hands. "She's just a girl, married for a cow. Poor thing." When the preacher said, "You may kiss the bride," Caleb only nodded once, then offered Eliza's arm. She took it because she had to. Outside, a single cow lowed softly as they left the church. That night, in Caleb's stone ranch house, Eliza sat on the edge of a bed too big for one person. Caleb stood by the window, lantern light flickering across his weathered features. "I won't touch you," he said, voice like gravel. "You're my wife in name only, unless you say otherwise." He took a blanket from the bed, settled into the chair by the window with the heaviness of a man who'd stopped hoping long ago. Eliza lay down fully dressed, eyes wide in the darkness. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She'd feared something worse. Yet this silence felt almost stranger. Outside, prairie wind rattled the shutters like bones. She turned her face to the pillow and let the tears come. "For a cow, my father sold me," she whispered to the night. "But this man, who is he? A stranger made of ice, or a heart that once burned and forgot how?" The morning brought silence that pressed against the ribs. Caleb was gone before sunrise. She heard his boots, the front door closing soft but firm. A man trained not to disturb anyone, even in his own home. She wandered the house in her thin nightgown. No photos, no flowers, just furniture polished too clean. A single loaf sat on the table beside butter wrapped in linen. Breakfast was quiet. Lunch lonelier still. Caleb worked dawn to dusk, inspecting cattle, mending fences, managing hands who looked at Eliza with awkward sympathy. He ate alone, read alone, slept across the hall, door always closed. It wasn't cruelty. It was distance. Town proved worse. When she rode in with Caleb's wagon, whispers followed like smoke. That's her, Caleb's girl, the one he married for a cow. Luke Carter, whom she'd once danced with at a harvest festival, sneered as he passed. Didn't peg you for the livestock type, Eliza. She held her chin high and paid in silence. But the words cut deep. That night, Eliza stood by the kitchen window long after dark. A storm threatened the North Ridge. Her tea had gone cold. She didn't hear Caleb approach. He set a steaming cup beside hers without a word, then turned away. Peppermint, the kind her mother used to brew when she cried herself to sleep. Small gestures followed. Silent ones. Her torn gloves appeared mended on the windowsill. Her broken necklace, repaired with silver wire, returned to her dresser. A book of poetry she'd admired in town materialized beside her pillow, red ribbon marking a page. Caleb never asked what she wanted, but somehow he gave it anyway, until one still night, when even the trees held their breath, she heard music. Not wind, not a fox's cry. Something gentler. She crept through the hall barefoot, pushing open the front door. There, under the porch light, sat Caleb Archer, legs spread, elbows on knees, harmonica in his hands. He wasn't playing for an audience. His eyes fixed on the horizon where the last sun faded to ash. The tune was raw and aching. Grief made music. When he stopped, he held the harmonica like it carried a memory he couldn't forget. Quietly he whispered, "Mary would have liked that one." Eliza froze, backing into the shadows, but her heart beat loud in her chest. For the first time, she saw him, not as the man who'd bought her with cattle and coin, not as the quiet stranger who lived beside her, but as a man once broken. Suddenly, she didn't feel so alone. Now gunfire cracked the air around them. The ranch exploded into chaos. Bullets screamed overhead. Wood splintered. The hay barn burst into flames. Caleb and his foreman, Hank, returned fire from the porch, holding the line. Eliza stayed inside, loading rifles, handing ammunition through the window with steady hands. Then a scream. Caleb turned. One of the outlaws had broken to the side gate, creeping around to flank them. The man raised his pistol at Caleb's back. But Eliza burst from the doorway. She threw herself forward, grabbing the outlaw's arm just as the gun fired. The bullet missed Caleb, grazing the porch beam. Caleb spun and fired. The attacker fell. "Eliza!" he cried, rushing to her side. Her hands shook. Her breath came shallow. "I'm all right," she whispered. "Just a bruise. You should have stayed inside. And let them take you?" Her voice trembled. "Never." The sky turned black with smoke. Flames leaped from the barn. Screams echoed from both sides. Bitter Creek was burning. Caleb pulled her close. "I've already lost everything once," he said, voice raw. "My wife, my child, my peace. But Eliza, I cannot lose you." She looked up at him, eyes wide with shock and something else. "Then don't," she whispered. They kissed amid ash and gunfire. The world narrowed down to two hearts beating defiantly in the smoke. With renewed fury, Caleb rose and rallied his men. By dawn, the gang lay defeated or fled. The ranch smoldered but stood, and from its scorched soil, something new had taken root. The morning after brought strange quiet to Bitter Creek. Smoke still curled from the edges of the Archer Ranch like breath from a wounded animal. The barn lay half-burned, its roof caved in, beams blackened with soot. Fences snapped and scattered like matchsticks. The once tidy yard was trampled mud, hoofprints and blood-soaked dirt, but the house still stood. Paint scorched, shutters cracked, but unbowed. It stood the way Caleb had, scarred but proud. The Delancey gang was no more. Some lay dead beneath the rising sun. The wounded grown under the sheriff's care, carted away toward justice. What they left behind wasn't just destruction. It was fear, yes, but also strange new reverence. By noon, Bitter Creek began to change. Townspeople arrived on foot and wagon, quiet and uncertain. Men who'd once scoffed at Caleb Archer, the widowed recluse, now tipped their hats in respectful silence. Some offered help with repairs. Others just stood by the fence line, unsure what to say. Women who'd whisper behind fans about the girls sold for a cow brought warm loaves wrapped in cloth, jugs of clean water. Their eyes, once sharp with gossip, were soft now, damp with shame, wide with awe. She saved him, someone murmured outside the gate. She stood her ground with him. That girl didn't run. Just like that, the story changed. No longer was Eliza Archer the bride exchanged for livestock. She was something else now, a fighter, a woman who'd carve her place into the hard stone of the West, not with words, but with grit and grace. Inside the house, Caleb moved with slow precision. His body ached in places long forgotten. He issued orders, patched broken hinges, organized supplies. But every time he passed Eliza, his hand would brush hers. A fleeting touch, a reassurance, a promise spoken in silence. That evening, as the sky bled orange into deep violet dusk, they sat on the porch. Dust swirled gently across the yard. The wind was no longer a threat. Behind them, chickens clucked and picked through the ash as if nothing had ever happened. Caleb leaned back, his arm resting behind Eliza's shoulders. Not possessive, just present. His fingers brushed the fabric of her dress, torn and singed from battle. But she didn't shrink from him. Eliza stared across the blackened pasture, where green shoots already dared to return. Her hands were scraped, her dress stained, but her spine was straight. Her chin lifted. "You think it's over?" she asked, voice like breeze across brittle grass. "For now," Caleb replied. After a long pause, he added quietly, "You should know, I've never trusted anyone the way I trust you." She turned to look at him. Startled, he smiled, not a smirk or a polite grin, but a true, worn smile that softened every sharp edge of his weathered face. "I mean it," he said. "You didn't run. And because of that, neither did I." But there were secrets still between them. That afternoon, while putting away linens in the bedroom Caleb rarely used, Eliza noticed a drawer slightly ajar. Inside lay a neatly folded handkerchief, old but carefully kept. Embroidered in one corner was a single letter, M. Beneath it, a broken chain. A locket, its clasp cracked, but inside it held a tiny sketch of a woman and child, drawn in soft pencil strokes. The woman looked to be in her 20s, hair pinned in an old style. The little girl, perhaps 6, smiling wide with a missing tooth. Eliza's breath caught. She closed the drawer slowly, the locket pressed in her hand like it might burn through her skin. That evening, she found Caleb by the hearth, sharpening a blade slowly, rhythmically. The fire cast long shadows up the walls. "I found this," she said softly, holding out the handkerchief. Caleb paused. His gaze met hers, and something inside her shifted. The sternness was there, yes, but behind it was a weight that sagged the edges of his eyes, a sorrow that had nothing to do with her. He didn't speak, simply looked back at the fire. Later that night, Alma, the older woman who helped at the ranch, told the story slowly. Her expression darkened as she set down her spoon. "You're his wife now. You have a right to know. But it's a wound that never closed, girl." Caleb Archer had once been different, warmer, livelier. Married to a schoolteacher named Margaret, they had a little girl named Clara. One winter, a gang of outlaws passed through Bitter Creek. They robbed the store, then headed toward the hills. Caleb was away buying supplies. When he returned, the house had been ransacked. Margaret and Claire were gone. He tracked the men across frozen land for 4 days. When he found them, he killed them all. But it didn't bring them back, Alma said, voice low. And the man who returned wasn't the same. Eliza listened in silence, her hands cold around her tea. That night, she couldn't sleep. She thought of the harmonica, the gloves, the way Caleb never looked anyone in the eye for too long. A week passed, then 2. One evening, Caleb left the house after dinner, without a word. Eliza, moved by something she couldn't name, followed from a distance. The air was still, the moon pale and high. He walked to a small fence plot beneath the cottonwoods, a simple graveyard. 2 headstones side by side. He knelt before them, removing his hat. Eliza stayed him behind a tree, bark rough against her cheek. "I'm sorry," Caleb said softly. "I should have been there. Should have protected you." His voice cracked. "I'm not the man I was. Don't know if I ever will be again." Eliza felt sharp pain rise in her chest. Her eyes stung. She'd feared him, pitted herself. But now she saw not a monster, not a captor, but a man living in a house of ghosts, fighting to keep them from swallowing him whole. She turned away before he could see her tears. The days that followed passed with quiet grace. Bitter Creek remained dry, but something inside the Archer Ranch was shifting. Softly, slowly, like thawing earth after winter. It began with tea. One morning, Eliza noticed Caleb working by the southern fence. The sun was cruel that day, pressing down like a curse. Without thinking, she poured hot tea into a chipped porcelain cup, added honey, and walked out barefoot across the porch. He didn't hear her approach. When she held the cup out to him, he paused. For a moment, she thought he might refuse. But he took it. Their fingers brushed. He nodded just once and drank in silence. No words, but something unspoken passed between them, carried on the steam. Later that week, she found the silver chain on her nightstand. Her necklace, broken weeks ago when she tripped carrying firewood. She left it in a drawer, thinking it lost the time. Now it lay neatly coiled, the clasp repaired, polished to a gentle shine. He hadn't said a word. She didn't ask. But that night she wore it again. One afternoon she knelt in the dry garden behind the house, dirt beneath her nails, planting marigolds and lavender in the empty beds. Alma had warned her. He doesn't let anyone touch that soil. It was hers, Margaret's. But Eliza couldn't stop herself. When Caleb walked past, he paused. Their eyes met. He said nothing, just looked at the flowers, then at her, and nodded before walking on. The next morning, she found a small bag of seeds. Wild roses, left beside her gloves. The ranch was still quiet, still ruled by routines and long silences. But Eliza no longer felt invisible within it. She cooked, not just because she must, but because Caleb would leave his plate clean and murmur, "Thank you." She stitched curtains to the study window and found them hung without comment. She began humming while she worked. And sometimes, just sometimes, she thought she caught Caleb listening. Then came the day of the accident. She'd been learning to ride alone, stubbornly refusing to ask Caleb for help. The horse spooked at a snake near the creek bed. Eliza's foot slipped from the stirrup. The world turned, and she hit the ground hard. The next thing she remembered was Caleb's voice, sharp and panicked, as he dismounted and rushed to her side. "Eliza, stay still. Don't move." She tried to speak, but pain shot through her side. He lifted her, arms steady but shaking, and carried her all the way to the house. "I'll fetch bandages." Alma hovered in the doorway. "No," Caleb barked. "I'll do it." He set Eliza gently on the couch, brushing dirt from her face with callous fingers. "Why were you riding alone?" His voice cracked with anger. "You could have." He stopped, breathed, then softer. "I thought I had no fear left in me. Thought I buried it with them." Eliza blinked through tears. "But I was wrong," he whispered. "I was terrified, afraid of losing you." He looked at her then, really looked. She reached up, touched the edge of his hand. Neither of them spoke after that, not for a long time, but the silence felt different now. It felt like something growing. Spring came late to Bitter Creek that year, but when it arrived, it came like a quiet miracle. The cracked earth, once too hard for seeds, softened beneath gentle rains. Wildflowers sprang up in surprising places. Between fence posts, along wagon ruts, even to the soot-blackened corners of the barn. Lilacs bent in the breeze like old women dancing. Goldenrod lit up the pastures like candles flickering back to life. Prairie daisies swayed with bees clinging to their centers, as if the land itself had begun to breathe again. At the Archer Ranch, the pace slowed, but the work never stopped. Caleb and Eliza rebuilt what had been lost. They cut new boards of barn wall, hammered nails into fresh timber, rest-strung wire across the corral gate. Their hands were often covered in soil or calluses, but there was no tension in their movements. Only ease, only rhythm. Their silences were no longer heavy. They were companionable, like an old song hummed under breath. One morning, Eliza knelt in the dirt near the well, pressing marigold roots into earth beside sprigs of mint. The scent was sharp and hopeful. Behind her, Caleb approached with a canteen, shirt damp with sweat. He handed it to her, without a word. She smiled as she took it, brushing his fingers. He didn't flinch. Instead, he lingered just a moment longer. That afternoon, walking back in the far pasture, they paused by the new stretch of fencing Caleb had built. The sun dipped low, painting everything in amber. Eliza looked across the land. Still scarred, still stubborn, but undeniably alive. "I used to think," she said, voice quiet but steady, "that the day my father sold me to you for a cow was the day my life ended." She looked at him, eyes shining with something deeper than tears. "But it wasn't the end. Not even close. You gave me something I didn't know I needed. A home, a choice, a future." Caleb looked at her. The lines of his face softened. "Not a trade," he said. "A beginning." She reached for his hand, and he took it without hesitation. They walked the fence line in the warm hush of spring, shadows stretching behind them, the scent of new blossoms in the air. The land was blooming again, and so were they.